Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Mescher's YouTube channel. This is going to be video number 2. For now, we are going to be covering The Hate U Give. This was a novel I was really looking forward to read. I had never read a book by Angie Thomas before. Admittedly, not too many novels I had read that gave a perspective from an African-American character as the protagonist in the novel. So I was really excited to read this book, and it was, of course, it was a little bit out of my comfort zone. So I was very much looking forward to reading the book and seeing what it was about. And I will say I was not disappointed by this at all. I think the premise of the book was great. So, to give you a quick look into it, stars a character in the made-up area of Garden Heights in California, and she essentially lives 2 lives. So she lives one in her actual home in Garden Heights, and then she goes outside to another school outside of her area to attend high school, which her parents enrolled her for. It's much safer, much more comfortable. This high school was much safer, much more comfortable. But realistically, what it is a private school that is filled with white students. One of the problems that Star faces is that she's constantly trying to find a balance between who she is in Garden Heights and who she is at the high school around her new friends. She's one of the only 2 African-American students in the school. She has a bit of trouble finding who she is and who she can connect with. The main idea behind the story, though, is that she is riding home from a party, one of which she rarely attends, in Garden Heights, riding home with her friend Khalil, and he's pulled over for a broken taillight, which doesn't seem to be a majority of the issue that the police officer has with him. And they get into what is essentially a pissing contest. Khalil is not happy that he was pulled over, and the police officer seems very combative of Khalil. He pulls Khalil out of the car and searches him 3 times. Then runs his license and registration and checks all that out. And while Khalil is standing outside the car waiting to get that back, he reaches in the car and grabs his hairbrush and brushes his hair up a little bit. The police officer shoots him 3 times. So he's patted down 3 times and shot 3 times. The idea behind the novel is that this police officer should be punished for the loss. The novel references several other murders of young African-American men. We see Eric Garner come up. We see Trayvon Martin. So there are several people that are also spoken of in this novel. So it's not just a view of an imaginary world, but it's also kind of a look into our own world. I did really appreciate the novel. I grew up in a pretty cultural neighborhood. A lot of the people I went to school with came from varying cultures. I certainly didn't go to an all-white school as Star ends up going to for her high school. This was certainly a fresh look at it for me. One of the most exciting parts of this novel was that I saw how African-American students behaved. I saw how they interacted with their friends. The novel covers what kind of music they listen to. It covers culture that the African-American students that she associates with in Garden Heights. Although Khalil had momentarily sold drugs, it had nothing to do with him being pulled over. It had nothing to do with him being shot. And the media, the police officer, known as 115 was his badge number. Several people of the community just generally believe that these stack the odds against Khalil. It's a very telling narrative of how biased the media is, how it can really control our perception of how we see people. I was pretty young when Trayvon Martin was murdered in Florida. I wasn't following the news story very closely, but this, as much as this is just a fun novel to read, it's also a look into the social issues that young people can face. Star becomes kind of an advocate for Khalil's death. She stands up for him. She does a little bit of protesting in the novel. I think the way that Star reacted to Khalil's death was very touching. It was down to earth. It reminded me a lot of the hashtag that Florida school students who went through a school shooting, hashtag never again. And Star certainly embodies this idea. I would recommend that you check this book out. This is a major, much better than Nickel and Dimed. I would certainly suggest that you check out The Hate U Give. It gives a telling narrative. It gives great ideas for how African American students live. Unique perspectives. Star has a boyfriend in the novel, Chris, and he's from the predominantly white high school. So we see several instances where Star is a minority and she has to not act ghetto. She has to avoid acting as what she describes as ratchet. I think it just gives a really telling narrative for how African American students have to portray themselves in order to not be looked down upon. My personal favorite scene in the novel was Chris asks, there are 4 people in the car, Chris and then Star's brother and another friend are in the car. He asks them, why do African Americans have such strange names? And then Star explains it that Devontae is not a strange name. It's not an uncommon name. Her name, as well as Seven's name, they have very important meanings. They're not abnormal. They're not strange. They're unique. After taking an intercultural communication course at Kent State, this really spoke to me. It really made me think about how names are quick to define us. So it mentions in the novel how could King not be a prominent person in the neighborhood with a name like that. So I think it speaks in so many different ways. And once again, just like Nickel and Dimed, this is a great conversation starter. There are several spaces in this novel that you could dedicate entire conversations among your peers with. And I would suggest you reading this. It really gives a nice look into the life of Star, in the life of many African American students and the struggles that they face. The next novel on my list is The Good Neighbor. This is a book about Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. Recently in 2018, there was a movie made about him. This is kind of similar to the movie. It's a bit of a biography about Mr. Rogers, and it details his life, how he kind of shaped his own life, what shaped his life, how he avoided becoming disingenuous in a life of stardom. I'm looking forward to reading this. This seems to be a very good novel, although it is very long and maybe gives a bit of unnecessary or uninteresting information about Mr. Rogers. I'm certainly looking forward to this. Look forward to the review of The Good Neighbor. I'll see you next time.